Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another incredible, invigorating episode today. So sit back and enjoy. I think most of you should know what I'm going to talk about at first. It's no mystery, as this is the biggest news in the world right now, and it is Trump's military operation into Venezuela that captured Maduro. And we got several questions about this. We got a question from K-Max, Nitro, and two from Deuteronormative, but we're going to be covering pretty much all those angles that they asked, so we're not going to read out the questions, but just know that those are the three people who asked for my opinion on the military operation. And so we're going to go into that, whether it's a good thing, bad thing, what I think, etc., etc. So my opinion is I fully support it. I was skeptical. I had a tweet a month or two ago about how it might not be how we should support regime change in Venezuela because Maduro is anti-American, has been pushing hundreds of thousands of migrants to our country, has been pushing drugs to our country, is allied with our enemies, particularly China, and it is not it's a shithole state. And allowing Maduro to stay in power encourages more Venezuelans to come here. If we had a stable, prosperous Venezuela, we could, one, ensure that no more Venezuelans come here. Two, also with the foreign policy matter, is ensure that China doesn't have a foothold in our backyard. And then three, be able to send migrants back there. And so we want right-wing governments, or at least U.S.-friendly governments, to take over in Latin America to control their to control their populations from migrating to the U.S., to keep China out of our backyard, and to take back migrants that we have in our country. So it's all around good thing for it. But I was always skeptical of this because we had tried to get rid of Maduro in the first Trump term. We kept backing or encouraging various military coups. They all failed. There was even an operation, I think, with American mercenaries where they captured the boat. Like, it all ended in failure. So that's why, when people like, I think Hanani and others were bringing up Grenada and Panama, I was saying it seems that he has a greater degree of support within the country, or at least enough of a military to prevent a coup. So that's why I was always skeptical about it. But I didn't realize that we would do a special forces operation in the middle of the night that lasts a little over an hour, and we immediately capture him and the military operation is done. I didn't realize that we could actually pull this off, and so my attitude towards it has changed. Is that the main important thing is that we have a quick transition to a friendlier government that does what we want it to do. People are all like, we need a military dictator, we need a Democrat. It doesn't, and even with the new socialist leader that they have, this woman who's being like, oh, we need to get Maduro back, we stand with Maduro, she's likely going to be better because she doesn't want to end up like Maduro being kidnapped in the middle of the night, and she's coming at this from a far weaker position. And she's going to be more likely to do what we want them to do rather than Maduro. Even Maduro was trying to make a deal, but he was trying to ask for millions and millions of dollars and all of these set-asides that, it's not good to just allow that to happen, especially when we send a better message by kidnapping in the middle of the night, as that terrifies all the rest of these Latin American socialists who are anti-American, who encourage migration to our country, who are encouraging drug trafficking to our country. And it sends a message also to the cartels that we should start doing this to cartel leaders as well. So it really announces American power over the region, and it's necessary to do that. Like, these are shithole countries. They do not have a degree. They should not be allowed to just thumb their noses at us and do whatever they please and invite our enemies into their country in order to defy us. It is necessary to send a message to them that we are the top dog, and if you fuck around, this is what's going to happen to you. And I think it's fully awesome what we've done, and I think it's the right call. I think these quick military operations in Latin America is what we've done throughout history. We're probably going to be doing a IQ supplement later this week on Friday about Latin America and America's historical relationship with it. So we'll eventually cover that later on this week. But this is not unprecedented. We've done this for well over a century. We were sending in troops into various parts of Latin America, Nicaragua, Haiti, if you couldn't say, well, that's like Latin American, Caribbean, Mexico, and we've even had a near war with Venezuela and with Britain in the late 19th century, and also we're combating with Germany. We've been having intervention. We've been involved in Latin America since the founding. I don't know if the founding, but since the early 19th century. What was the Monroe Doctrine? It was establishing this is our backyard and the rest of the world should stay out. That was dropped in the 1820s. This is a part of keeping our policy. What was the Mexican-American War? What was the Spanish-American War? This is a time-honored American tradition. And even though there's some people who are like, we just need to focus on our own country, which I understand when it's like happening with Ukraine or, some, random part in the Middle East. But Latin America is connected to us. We understand it's our backyard, and we just can't let the entire rest of the Western Hemisphere to go to shit and expect it not have that not to affect us. Because when these countries turn bad, then we get migration, then we get drugs, then we get all these other terrible things that are coming, and then we get instability and potentially revolutionary governments, and then they're inviting China in. So it's necessary for us to intervene in these countries, and we've always done such actions. So I think it's totally warranted, and it's something you should be feeling patriotic about as well. I do have to say it's very funny seeing all the cope for this action coming from right wingers. A lot of them are foreigners, but it's so funny that this is like just a complete and total victory for the empire. And these guys are like, you've just awakened a lion to do what? Like, what are the Venezuelans going to do? Oh no, internet people, angry malcontents on the internet are really upset. There's these people, and people are just so coping that this is wrong. Like, I was arguing with such idiots. I mean, I do that every day. I mean, the dumbest people on the internet always come into my mentions to be morons. But there's all these people who are like, oh, we're just set off. We incurred a lot of risks doing this. And it's like, no, there were risks, and those didn't happen. So there was that. I had some guys saying Nixon would never do such a thing. Nixon toppled Allende and got Pinochet in Chile. And he was very committed to ensuring that pro-American governments were installed throughout Latin America and in other parts of the world. Nixon would have totally done something like this if he had the ability to do so. And then he's like, oh no, he just focused domestically. And it's once again, people have zero knowledge base within our side. And if you think that Nixon was focused domestically, you know absolutely nothing about Nixon. Nixon didn't focus on anything domestically, and most of his domestic policies weren't very good because he didn't have any power to do much of the domestic front. So that's why he focused entirely on foreign policy. But then people just lie to themselves and delude themselves. And so you get all this stuff is like, you're not looking at Iraq. This is going to get us involved in a quagmire. We already got in and out. Like, this is not Iraq. And also, Latin America is not the Middle East. Is that we are not dealing with religious nut jobs and the Islamic terrorists that we were dealing with in the Middle East. And it is a bit more of an advanced civilization as well. Despite how crappy it is, the tribal blood feuds and the extreme Islamic fundamentalism and all these countries having these massive divides based on ethnicity, religion, tribe. These aren't really the case in Latin America. They are poor countries. There is a divide between the Indios and the Castizos, but that's still nowhere near the type of divide between like the Kurds and Arabs and the Sunnis and Shias in various parts of the Middle East. And it just aren't as if we're not having troops there, we don't really, this isn't really our problem to deal with either. So it's very, Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan are very different from Latin America. And we've been doing this stuff all the time and with generally decent results for America. Not the type of bloodbath and quagmire that we dealt with in the Middle East. So we're not going to have that. But I even had all these people like, this is going to encourage terrorism. From what? Is there like Islam? There's no jihadis in Venezuela. And also these socialists, like all the people who are dealing, our main problems in Latin America are dealing with much more rational actors than we're dealing with in the Middle East. Like jihadis are extremely irrational actors that we can't really understand and can't deal with whatsoever. Compared to the socialists and the cartels, they are much more rational actors. Cartels just want their business model to keep going and for them to make money. And if they piss off the American government too much and their business model is screwed, then they will try to make terms. It's like you got to think about this, is that the cartels, when they briefly kidnapped some black drug dealers who wandered into Mexico, and they turned out to be American citizens, and we made up this story like, oh, they were just touring or tourists or something. The cartels immediately released them and even handed over the guys suspected for it, as they were terrified of an American retaliation for that. That's something that ISIS, Al Qaeda, the Taliban would not do. They have far different motivations. And it's the same with the socialists. It's like these people in Maduro's government, they're not Al Qaeda. They're not willing to fight to the bitter end. This woman who's now in charge, she is terrified of the same thing happening to her, and she would much rather make a deal to stay in power than to carry on the Chavez legacy here. She would much rather, make a deal, ensure she stays in power and does what America wants, than to, wage holy war against the United States. So we're dealing with, people of much more rational motivations, that they just want to stay in power and they just want to make money. And when you have those as your primary motivations, that's far easier to deal with than the insane motivations of Islamic fundamentals that we're dealing with all the time in the Middle East, or even the long-standing blood feuds. Like, we will never cooperate with our mortal enemies, and so we would have to deal with that stuff. So Middle East is a completely different situation we're dealing with Latin America, and we have a 2-century experience, a 200-year experience of dealing with the region. So I don't think that's really the matter here in dealing with Venezuela. But it's so there's just all this type of cope and seething about it. It's like, oh, where we're gonna really have this is really gonna be a bad thing. I saw, and some of the people who are getting into this is very funny with like white nationalists. It's like the only type of government that some white nationalists seem to have any support for are non-white dictatorships that are complete crappy countries, whether it's Iran, Venezuela, North Korea, the ant colony, the human ant colony, and they're like, we hands off this. This is like, we're very into being white. That's why we love the human ant colony, the mullahs, and Maduro, the most like non-white forms of governments in the world. But so they're into that, which I guess shows more of the level of disconnection between them and actual white people and actual Americans. And it's just a bad move to always want to be a traitor to your country and always want to see your country lose and to always demand the breakup of it. It's like, even communists of the early 20th century showed a greater loyalty to their country than a lot of the online right-wingers that are always wanting to be traitors and stand against their country. The one thing is that these guys are just doing it as a video game. They don't actually have the guts to carry through with these actions, but due to their own alienation and their status as a misfit, they get into this and have a traitorous attitude towards the country. That's not to say you can't criticize the country when it does something stupid and to not like, Biden and when it's controlled by liberals. But I think when you view Maduro and North Korea and China and Iran or even Russia as your real, the real people you support against your own country, that's really that's not very good optics, and it establishes yourself as a traitor, and nobody wants to listen to a traitor. Even the North Vietnamese really hated American leftists who came over and were siding with them. They're like, oh, thanks for the support. But all these North Vietnamese leaders were like, we really don't like these people because they're traitors to their own country. And they had no respect for them at all, for the American leftists. And that's the same with it. Is like there's very little respect for traitors. And you have to realize is that we are Americans. We should be supporting our country. That's why we don't want to get involved in idiotic foreign policy entanglements that are going to hurt our country, like Iraq or Libya. We wanted to pursue an America First foreign policy. That's why we want to keep out immigrants, because we want the best of our country. We don't want to destroy our country. And I think the accelerationism argument, I have no time for it, because you lose by losing, you don't win by losing. And destroying the country, you're most likely going to replace it with something even worse. As if you look at how the Roman Empire fell, it was then taken over by war bands, which if you want to look at the modern day equivalent, those are cartels and gangs. It's not the productive citizens of Rome, the heritage Romans who are then taking over power with the Roman Empire falls. It is these foreign war bands who are taking over power. And we'd likely see a similar situation where America fell. It wouldn't be the heritage Americans now get to establish, their ethno state. It's more that now all these cartels, gangs, and other people who have the capacity to wield violence independent of the state, which is generally criminal elements, are now in control. And that would be a worse situation than we have now. So I'm never into the accelerationist argument. Or let's say the government's still there, and then the people rise up and support a left-wing government that can avenge Maduro. But I was seeing people were like, we're going to one day avenge Maduro. And it's like, yeah, well, we're going to have a white nationalist revolution to avenge brown dictators. Yeah, that's I really right-wing attitude towards that. But I think it's all cope and seethe, because there's no really way to be mad about this, and all these people have to rationalize it. It's a huge W for the American empire, and shows the strength of our military and how we can just do things if we feel like it. And you can even look at Europe. Europe is just having we're going to review the matter to see if it was legal. Fuck you. What are you going to do? Send a strongly worded letter that we throw in the trash? Like the DoorDash driver delivering food to the people planning this operation have far more influence than anyone from the EU. They don't matter in this degree. And so it's like the rest of the world realizing how much of a flex this is. And we also flexed on China, we flexed on Russia, and it's just showing the strength of it. So I think it was a brilliant move by Trump. That's my main thing, and I think it's going to send a message to a lot of these Latin American countries that are being anti-American, like Lula, the guy in Colombia. Nicaragua is led by a left-wing dictator as well. Cuba, that they're going to need to play ball with us, or they may end up like Maduro. And I think that's in our interest to do. It's our backyard. We can do what we want in it. And we've always done that. And even when people are complaining like, oh, this is for oil, it's for our companies. Well, that benefits you. You're now going to have a cheaper, more secure, you're going to now have more oil at a lower price coming into the market thanks to this. The Americans going to benefit for this. When they're like, this is a war over oil, it's like, that sounds like it's going to benefit us. Like, wow, now our gas prices go down even further. Now our energy costs are lower. Wow, we're really losing here. This is awful that we've had this. It's like Thomas Massey and MTG talking about this stuff. It's like, yeah, a war for oil. Yeah, that's benefiting America. Like actually securing tangible economic benefits for our country. Yeah, that's a necessary intervention. We didn't get any tangible benefits for Iraq. Actually, we lost blood and treasure there. We didn't secure any oil there. But now here in Venezuela, they're like, oh, this is for American companies. Well, they come in, and then that provides more products and at a lower cost for Americans. So Americans are going to be happy with that. It's like it's stupid with that. Even with like MTG and Mass, they're like wanting to go and like it would be really funny if they try to impeach Trump over this. Well, I think this is MTG's last week in office, so we'll never have to hear from Kim Trill, Jeff Flake again. But it's like all these all-purpose critics of Trump. It's like no matter what. I mean, it makes sense that Massey's against this, but with MTG, she's supposed to be America first. It's actually putting Americans first by trying to secure the oil in Venezuela. That makes a lot more sense than trying to spread democracy or our values around the world. So that is my matter about it. I think all the criticism is stupid. It's good for us for the left to want to rally behind Maduro because he's such a tawdry, indefensible character. So we should. So it's good for us that the left goes rallies behind him and is like, free Maduro. We just further embarrass them. But nobody on our side should even be thinking about this. We're America first, not brown dictator first. Now that brings up all the people crying about international law. Oh no, this is violating it. How could you do this? It's also really funny coming from people who think that Nuremberg was the greatest injustice ever, where now they're citing international law. It's like, I wonder what event established international law more than anything else. I wonder, but I'm sure the Nuremberg critics will help inform us about this. But, it's like all these people, there's like an account like Armchair Warlord crying about international law. It's like, I don't think a warlord would really care about international law. Now, the thing is, there is a degree that you need to have some respect for international law. Is that we establish it so we have an orderly, stable world order or orderly world order. You know what I mean? But the guarantor of international law is the United States of America. No one else cares about it. What the hell is Europe going to do? Send a strongly worded letter? Like, they're not going to do shit. China doesn't give a shit about the international law. Russia doesn't care about international law. Venezuela doesn't give a shit about international law. They're a rogue state that thumbs their nose at us and does and is involved in narco terrorism and is involved, being a state power involved in drug trafficking that kills Americans and kills other people is not a sign of following international law. So we are taking out an international pariah here by going into Venezuela. But we guarantee international law. We make it. And we've done these policies all the time. We went into Grenada and Panama and took out other rogue actors. We do this all the time in the Latin America. And we don't need to ask the rest of the world for permission because we make international law, not them. And all these people, and it's even some of the funny things with like libertarians who talk about the injustice of having laws in America that want an anarchic society here where it's like you can do whatever you want no matter what, and there's just the NAP you have to follow, and then they want some kind of anarchic system here. And then when America takes out a rogue actor who is threatening the international order and supports criminal elements that harm us and the rest of the world, then they're like, oh no, international law, we've got to respect it. No. And first off, the basis of international law, as I said, we establish it, but we get to do what is in our best interests in the Western Hemisphere. We're doing this by the book. We didn't execute him. We're bringing him to stand trial under the law. So we are following the rule of law. We did this legally. And it's just another way of complaining about this. Like the Iraq invasion, which some of these people who are whining about international law were supporting. I don't know, not like right-wing elements, but some of the liberal centrist elements, would have supported that. That was a far greater violation of international law, but no one can enforce it. We're the enforcer of it. We make international law. There is not some higher body that can tell America, yo, you're violating it, you're going to pay the price. That doesn't happen. We guarantee it. And our enemies are less supportive of international law than we are. What is Russia? And they're like, we're going to embolden Russia. embolden Russia to do what? Invade Ukraine? They already did that. And it's like, oh, China might invade Taiwan. They'll invade Taiwan. They will do whatever they want within Taiwan, regardless of what we're doing with Venezuela. These are dumb arguments that you shouldn't entertain. So there's all these matters. Now, I want to go to some of the Deuteronormatives questions on it. Is he asked just two things about what are the odds Milei, Bukele, and the new Venezuelan governor are successful enough to inspire a continent-wide shift towards politically stable capitalist societies by the end of the century. Well, end of the century, that's a long time away. We're about 74 years from the way of the century. So I don't, that's a lot can happen. I mean, it's like asking in the 1920s, what will happen in Latin America by the year 2000? That's a little bit. But in terms of, this decade, maybe meant by the end of the decade, I think that all Latin America is going to want to play ball with us and do what we say because of this action. They are terrified of being the next Maduro, and I think that's even the same with the new Venezuelan government. I think it's also smart with the Venezuelan government just to find whatever has the most support within the government, but is willing to do what we say. We don't need this Machado woman or some other puppet. Is that one of the lessons to learn from Iraq is to pick whatever is the most stable leader that they have who can guarantee the most order, regardless of whether they're proper Democrats, regardless of their past of supporting the regime we were opposed to, etc. Like, it would have been far better to find a Ba'athist general who realized the new order that had been established by America and had agreed to be the pro-American strongman and to keep peace and order intact through a strong hand in Iraq than to have imposed some puppet who had no support among the people. And so I think if this new lady, if she plays ball and does what we want and plays to our interests, and she's able to maintain support within the system, then it's fine to keep her there. It doesn't matter whether the right or left. It matters whether they do what we want and establish and keep an orderly country in Venezuela. So that's it. You don't want to do too radical of an experiment that could create destabilization and may lead to civil conflict. That's the most important thing, is to prevent Venezuela from descending into civil conflict. And I don't think it's going to happen with this because the government is, terrified and has just lost their leader and wants to do something to prevent the next person from being Maduro'd. And I think they'll play ball. So I think that's really what it's going to happen throughout the rest of the Latin American, is that a lot of these countries are going to be less inclined to thumb their noses. And the second question is what are the odds these Trump-friendly governments experience significant retribution from future left-wing administrations? Generally, American policy towards Latin America always is okay with these governments as long as they're maintaining peace and order and are staying pro-America. The one exception was Bolsonaro, where, Bolsonaro was the pro-American candidate and Lula was the anti-American candidate, but we saw Bolsonaro as a part of an international MAGA alliance. So the Biden administration backed Lula, who is pro-China and hostile towards their interests, just to, shove it to the MAGA elements in our country, just because of domestic reasons. But they left Bukele alone. They'll leave Milei alone. They'll leave anybody else right-wing alone. I mean, they will sometimes. And really, we didn't put our thumb too much on the scales in Brazil or elsewhere. We just didn't back the government that we should have backed that said, this is our guy. Well, with the Trump administration, we're obviously going to back a right-wing candidate in Brazil. We want to topple Lula. We want to end. It's the same with throughout Latin America, as we should. But I don't think the left-wing governments will do too much anything. The Democrats are more. The real thing you have to worry about Democratic administrations is them dealing with right-wing governments in Europe more so than in Latin America. They might try to punish Bukele because he was true pro-Trump, but I think that they still have experienced foreign policy hands who don't want instability arising in the region. And so I think they'll be smart enough. But no. They might, due to Bukele's involvement in immigration enforcement, it might become a campaign issue in 2028 for Democrats to say, we're going to punish Bukele. That might be the case. But other people, they're never going to go after Milei and, the guy who just became the right-wing leader of the new right-wing leader of Chile and others. They're probably just not going to provide as much, endorsement for them as they should, but I don't think that they're going to try to engage in regime change there. Bukele might be the one exception if it becomes a campaign issue for Democrats in 2028 and they're all up in arms over his involvement in immigration enforcement. So to conclude, there is one bad thing that we could take away from the Venezuela thing. I think it's fine to do these operations in our own backyard. Latin America is our backyard. We established that 200 years ago with the Monroe Doctrine. We've always done this stuff. It's nothing new. I had I quote tweeted Aaron McIntyre, who's like saying that oh, well, when we have Hispanics all in the State Department, we then want to wage war on their people's land. It's like both our wars were in Latin America were conducted by WASPs. The main people pushing for annexation of Cuba were always Southerners who saw this as a new slave state they could add. And, it was fully WASP who've been involved in sending troops to Latin America. When we sent troops we'll count Haiti as part of the region. We sent them under Wilson. We sent troops into Nicaragua under Wilson. This is when WASP controlled foreign policy. This isn't something new. We don't even have very many Hispanics in the State Department besides Marco Rubio. And Marco Rubio, well, he's Cuban. He's a white Hispanic. So I don't know if any other Hispanics are Cubans in the State Department. You can make that arguments about, the ethnic interest towards Israel maybe in the State Department, but Latin America, WASP have always had a long-standing interest in Latin America. So that aside, it's fine to do this stuff in Latin America. The problem is if we take this lesson and say, we should start doing this in the Middle East and maybe do this in Iran. Iran is not Venezuela. First off, the mullahs have far stronger social base that is willing to fight to the death for them. They've got the clergy and they've got the IRGC. And they've also got a rural Shiite population that is fully backing the regime. They are divided by these ethnic and religious conflicts that is something very different from the type of class conflict of Latin America. That, as we already witnessed in Iraq, when we get involved in that stuff, you lead to extremely bloody civil war. And if you're unable to establish a stable government, that means a ton of migrants are going to go to Europe. Now, you might say, well, Europe should just strengthen their borders like we do. The problem is Europe doesn't have quite the stomach to do these necessary measures that we're doing. Like, Europeans are never going to do the ICE terror raids that we're doing here in America. They don't really have the stomach for it. Now, hopefully they do eventually get that stomach, but for right now, they don't. And so they're going to have another migrant wave where Greece and some of these border countries are going to try to keep them out. And then all the, Nordics and other Eurocrats will be like, oh no, this is bad, this is terrible. And they're going to try to prosecute the Greeks and others and the Italians who try to keep them out. It's going to be a nasty situation, and it's going to destabilize the regions. And first off, if you kidnap the Ayatollah, he's a religious leader, you're instantly going to make him a martyr. Like, this is not a corrupt, guy like Maduro who's flying on drugs when he's doing his stupid dancing and singing along to John Lennon. I do have to say, this is awesome that our justification was him singing John Lennon and dancing, and this is why we invaded. This is like the best justification for intervention ever, is that some shitty leader starts singing John Lennon, and that pisses Trump off so much that he goes in. Trump has great instincts, I have to say. But, this is going to be a completely different situation if you do that with Iran. Now, Iran is far weaker than I think a lot of people would have thought at the beginning of 2025. We were able to bomb them with zero consequence. I mean, Israel was able to bomb them with no consequence. I mean, they were really punked in that. Now, I have my problems with it because I think that we should not greenlight Israelis Israel's reckless actions in the region because you risk destabilization, and they also are prone to not listen to us and just do whatever they want, which is not in our interest. But you should not apply this lesson to Iran, which I'm worried the administration might do. But I think they do realize the risk of killing the Ayatollah much more than they do with Maduro. I think it would be much harder to kidnap the Ayatollah, but they might try to do a targeted assassination of him, which they were threatening to do during the bombing raids of Iran last summer. So that's the one downside, is that we may take this lesson and try to apply to the Middle East, which the Middle East, the main thing is this is both to support Latin American interventions and to not support Middle Eastern interventions, is that the Middle East and Latin America are completely different. We should have a different policy for both. What works in Latin America is not going to work in the Middle East. What we do in the Middle East is not how we should treat Latin America. The lessons of Iraq, besides the lesson that we should support whoever is going to promise stability and order, regardless of their past, their commitment to liberal democracy, whatever. That's an important lesson to use across the world. At the same time, there are lessons that we had from Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, elsewhere, Syria. Those don't really apply to Latin America. Completely different region. We, as right-wingers, we understand that there's no such thing as universal man, is that you are defined by your ethnicity, culture, religion, place. And what happens in one part of the world doesn't mean it's going to happen in the other. And that should be a lesson for Latin America versus Middle East. So that's my last takeaway, is that we should realize Latin America is different from Middle East. We should not do this stuff in the Middle East, but we should pursue more actions, similar actions in Latin America, and threaten Cuba, Nicaragua, Colombia, and Brazil to get what we want from those countries, as it's in our interest to establish stability and order in those countries, so we prevent future migrants. And we got a ton of Nicaraguans, Cubans, and a bit of Colombians. We got a ton from Venezuela during the Biden administration due to their left-wing government sending all their criminals here and being unable to offer enough prosperity to keep people in their country. Compare that to El Salvador. So that is my take on the Venezuela strike, which we're supportive of. Now we're going to move on to a question from James. He's got a bunch of questions on right-wing critiques of lawfare and a Curtis Yarvin Substack piece saying the window for the admin to do regime change is closed due to compliance with judiciary. So it's both the same. It's two different questions. With the first question is, are the lower courts going to defeat us in the end? And does Yarvin's argument have merit? And so they're both apart, and I will say Yarvin's argument has no merit. I think I'm really sick of people who are wanting to eliminate our constitutional order and the rule of law to please internet people who are not even supportive of Trump. Is that the thing you have to realize is the process is working out for us, is that the Supreme Court has pretty much ruled nearly every single time in Trump's favor. We're also able to do incredible things, unprecedented things that we're never able to do in the first term, because we are more willing to push the boundaries, push the envelope on the courts and force them to do things. And we're also more inclined to just not quite follow the lower courts. We've also got enough conservative justices in the courts to support our cause. And the only thing that prevented Biden from establishing libtard dictatorship in the first term, or not his first term, it was his only term, I don't think he's going to run again in 2028, is the courts. Is the courts restrained Biden. And I know people think we're going to have a permanent right-wing dictatorship, even though everybody also these same people saying this also want Trump impeached and replaced with, I don't know who the hell they want him replaced with. But, there's this assumption that we're going to have permanent right-wing power. The Democrats are never going to have power again. And we need to have full-on regime change at this time. And thus we should just eliminate the judiciary and have Trump rule. But then we're all going to be mad when Trump does this, because we're going to say it's being done for Israel's interest or not doing enough, and we should impeach him And then we complain about how he's not following international law while we're wanting him to throw our own laws, which actually matter, which we people actually care about, has been long established for nearly 250 years. We want him to eliminate that, which is more serious, has greater support among the population, while then they're crying about international law. So I think it's all rather stupid, is that the lower courts are not going to defeat us in the end because the higher courts are supporting our cause. It's just the process. A lot of people have zero impulse control and can't imagine that things will happen in the future that will go their way. There's no understanding of time. If something doesn't happen immediately, they chimp out and go crazy. And that's like most of our side, is that they don't have enough impulse control and and they don't have a low time preference. They're high time preference people. You know who else are high time preference people? They're the people that we always have to avoid because they have bad schools and bad neighborhoods. So all these people are like low impulse control, high time preference. This describes a certain magical community in our country. And people are just like that. It's like, look, the process is generally playing out in our interest. And also, we're not facing a crisis within this country. And it would be extremely unpopular among our own party and among the public to establish dictatorship and to declare a state of emergency because we fell for fake news over the Brown University shooting and we need to arrest all libtards. That's just not going to how it's going to work. And there's no mechanism to enact regime change. There's nothing for this. And it's like going along with this couch potato authoritarianism where people want an authoritarian government simply to entertain themselves, but they're not willing to carry these risks. If we start to topple the legal order, that's going to inspire a lot of assassination attempts and future legal problems and future criminal prosecution for a lot of these people if we ever came out of power. And then when that happens, all these people will be like, but the rule of law, you can't prosecute Trump. That's against his rights, and so people will have this. Is that essentially it wouldn't work for us because we don't have control over the media in the way that the left would. And it just establishes the precedent that, that libtards can then have regime change and get rid of the courts and push out these conservatives. And they'd have much more ability to do that due to their institutional power that we don't have. So, no, there was not a mandate for regime change when Trump came in. The American public that votes, which even though all these people are like, we need to get rid of democracy, but as I said, our sphere is the most hyper-democratic, hyper-individualistic, hyper-egalitarian element within our society. And every person will, I had all these people who were like, I opposed the Venezuela strike, so my voice matters. That's very democratic of you to view with that mentality. But, the people did not vote for regime change. They voted to end wokeness, they voted to deport illegals, and they voted to have a much more saner country where common sense was restored. They did not vote for dictatorship. And already Trump's authoritarian moves are not popular with the public. So, and you might think it's like, well, if we get the judiciary, we can then end democracy. It's like, that's not how this is work, because the Republican Party's not going to go along with this. The military is not going to go along with this. Nobody's really going to go, and there's not like even a crisis for this. It's like it's why we try to search around for any crisis. Like somebody stubs their toe, and then we'll say, oh, we need a national state of emergency so we can have a dictatorship. And then everybody wants Trump out of power. Like half the people want like a right-wing dictatorship, think Trump should be impeached, which I guess they'll impeach him non-democratically. I don't know what that means, but no, I have no time for this stuff. Is that the wisdom of the founding fathers? This might sound conservative, but I don't care, because guess what? The founding fathers are base. They're awesome. We should respect their wisdom that they had. And the system that they established is a right-wing system that is designed to protect property, to prevent, socialist madness, and prevent the will of angry mobs that would demand wealth redistribution and a lot of other stupid things. They established this system and generally their wisdom matters more than people who have low impulse control and high time preference, who don't even back Trump, might not even be Americans, and we should instead listen to those types instead of the founding fathers were some of the wisest, most reasonable people who have ever existed on planet Earth. Who are you going to trust there? I'm going to pick Alexander Hamilton and James Madison to listen to. And I don't think it's not necessary to eliminate our constitutional order. The Constitution is a gift to us. It supports most of our interests. There's a few changes here and there. There doesn't need to be this type of conservative attitude towards it where it's like, you can't deport people. That's against the Constitution. Well, you know what? Actually, it's not against the Constitution. But you should not try to establish a dictatorship because this is extremely unpopular. As I've tried to mention, is that our people, including Trump supporters, hardcore Trump supporters, like democracy. They like freedom. They like liberty. They are not wanting, North Korea to occur in America. And so I just don't have time with it. It was like the thing with Yarvin is like Yarvin, I know he was complaining about how we're going after higher education and these universities is like, oh no, we're alienating future supporters from the elite, which is such a stupid argument. This is the funny thing is that regime change is when we arrest judges, but we need to not try to fire and harass Harvard and Yale. This makes no sense. And he's also still trying to get, the administration to fund his pet projects and stuff. So I think it's all stupid. You should not let, I get along with him personally. Some people view him as the devil. I don't view him as much as the devil because I probably don't take his political thoughts or his thoughts on contemporary politics that seriously as other people do. And I think this is the same with that. And you always see this stuff with the regime change. And I also saw all these people like, this is so true. And it's so true that I'm now going to back Democrats in 2028. And I'm just like, whatever. I think it's more due to the type of primitive behavior, we'll say primitive behavior that's rewarded on Twitter where people cannot have delayed gratification. They can't control their impulses. They're always in a state of hysteric panic like female peasants. And they have high time preference and all this stuff that it's behaviors that associate with people that we generally mock and criticize. So it has no merit. Judiciary is generally going in our direction. And the way to do this is to utilize the law we already have. We can put pressure on some of these older judges to retire and to get better judges in there. We should do a more thorough job of vetting these judges to ensure that they're going to support right-wing agenda items. But the Supreme Court right now is a huge benefit to us. The fact that we finally tipped the scales in our favor for the Supreme Court, I mean, there are still problems with Barrett, primarily Barrett, but also Kavanaugh, of course, which have their weaknesses. But it's still far better. It's the best Supreme Court we've had in 100 years. And a huge problem with why America was able to be transformed in a liberal direction was due to the Supreme Court's composition. Now, when we finally have a conservative composition of it, we've been able to return abortion to the states. I know a lot of conservatives like that. We've been able to eliminate affirmative action from universities when they've been able to pass rulings encouraging Trump's tough immigration enforcement policies and other things. So, and we even have the possibility, which I only give this a 25% chance of happening, but it's a higher percentage chance of happening than any time in the recent past, of eliminating birthright citizenship. So, the courts are not really the problem. They have a few problems with these liberal judges, but thankfully our system gives us the way to overturn those decisions. And generally, SCOTUS has been overturning that. It just requires a low time preference and high impulse control, namely white behaviors to understand and to comprehend. So no, I support our constitutional system. I trust the wisdom of the founders over deranged people on the internet who don't even support Trump. And that's my viewpoints. Sorry if that makes me a conservative, but I think that's it. And I don't even like. I think even some of these people, they undermine themselves, and I think Yarvin is that, especially with he in the beginning of last year was attacking Trump for his strong moves, and now he's like saying they are not strong enough. Whatever. And the solution and policy, and even like that, it's like, if you want to know my solutions, you have to subscribe. You have to get past the paywall. You have to subscribe to me. And I was like, that's a little tawdry. I mean, I have paywall stuff, but I'm not having my full opinion buried in the Metternich podcast. Okay. It's, and generally what I say in the paywall mailbag and that stuff comes out in articles and in the free podcast. So, if you want my solution, you've got to pay me $15 a month. I admire the chutzpah of that, but or at least I find it funny. But it further undermines that argument he's making. So that is my take on that. K-Max had a quick question that I will take literally less than a minute. He said, Keith Woods sat down for an interview with Jared Taylor. Your thoughts on the interview? If you saw it, I didn't watch it. I'm sure it's fine. So that's my answer to that question. And then Tiberian fan asked the question is, what is going on with the GOP at the national level? It seems that a lot of state parties are allowed to just go rogue with zero consequences, with local committees being left in the dust. Maybe I'm in a blind spot, but I thought getting rid of Ronald McDaniel would fix things, but it seems the organization is stagnant as ever. Well, I'm not sure what you're quite referring to. I imagine you think that like the Indiana state GOP and Utah state GOP are, defying what Trump wants on redistricting and some other things. But I mean, it's like that, we got a level where state parties can do things, but they're still put under pressure by Trump. It's still Trump's party, and they're less able to defy Trump than they were in the first term. Pretty much the entire party loved defying Trump. They were able to push out Steve King for making a defense of Western civilization in 2019, when today, DHS and even the Department of Labor tweet out things that are far more radical than what Steve King said. So I don't know. I don't think the party is getting a lot better, but there's still elements of defiance within it. There's still these old Mike Pence tier elements that are, waging resistance. And you can even see that within Beltway conservatism, with all these people leaving Heritage to go to Mike Pence's think tank. And so there's still a lot of people like that within the party and within the conservative, well, probably less so within the conservative movement, except for the older types, but there's still a lot of those elements within the GOP. But they have far less power than they did in the first term or even in the early 2020s. So there's still the Trumpification going on within the GOP. But there's still elements of resistance. It just takes time. I do think that the Indiana GOP, defying Trump and voting against redistricting, which is going against their own interest, is a bad sign, but still most of the state GOPs are fully Trumpified. Look at the South. Yes, there's still Lindsey Graham and some of their senators aren't very good, but if you look at their state legislatures, they're very MAGA. So it's just one of those things that happens. It takes time to have a full internal revolution of the party. And, over the last decade of Trump being involved in politics, the party has significantly changed, but there's still those old elements there. It happens, but they might not be there in another decade. So that is my answer to that. Renown has a question. He said, don't you agree that Elon Musk is by a long shot the most important right-wing leader? No. And then he said, Trump isn't. He's a lame duck. Trump is not a lame duck. He's literally the president of the United States. And how is he a lame duck? He is the most important figure on the right. What he says, everyone pays attention to. Every Republican is eager to demand his support for their election. That nobody is nobody's kissing Musk's ring like they are with Trump. Musk is no longer taking a leadership role. Musk had to bend the knee and kiss Trump's ring. He is not the most important right-wing leader. He is less important as a right-wing leader today than he was a year ago. He's less public. Nobody cares about his tweets as much as they did in early 2025. He doesn't have a direct role in the administration like he did in 2025. So that just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I guess you could have made this point in like February of 2025, but in January 2026, that doesn't matter. And also, people are far more critical of Musk and more willing to make fun of him, like I am, than they were in early 2025. He's not the most important right-wing leader. Now, most important right-wing donor, yes. He is the most important right-wing donor. It's up there with him and the Ellisons. It's probably a tie between them. He still has importance, but Trump is the leader. I don't know how he's a lame duck. He is the guy we turn to. He is the leader. He's still the undisputed leader. No one else compares. It would be him bending the knee to Elon, not the other way around if Elon was the most important right-wing leader. So, he points out that like Elon Musk is retweeting more right-wing content. He does, but fewer people pay attention to it. They paid more attention to that in last year because he mattered more. Now he can, tweeting about white genocide and other things, but people don't care as much, because they understand that he's no longer in that leadership role. He's just the world's wealthiest man. That's still a level of importance, but he's not the one directing the right. He's just more providing the money and support by running X in that way. So he's not the most important leader. I don't know where you get that Trump's a lame duck. Trump is a very powerful president and still the most important leader of the right. And no one comes close. I think Trump's in a more powerful position on the right than at any point ever. Even in his first term, he'd never had this level of leadership and level of control over the right that he does now. Ken's got 2 questions. Ken's questions: how many listeners do you get on the average regular episode mailbag? And I don't know. Why are you asking that? What kind of a question is? I don't know. I get 1 million. What? It's like, yeah, let me send you all my metrics. I don't know. I get a few thousand. That's it. Why do you want to know that? I don't know. Look up the own metrics. Some questions, I shouldn't be that harsh on curiosity, but I don't know. That's not. I'm just gonna say 1 million on each. Second question: who should white America cheer for in the college football playoff? Probably Indiana. They've got a white Hispanic quarterback. Yeah, I'd say Indiana. They're not as white as you might imagine for a Big Ten team. Like a lot of Big Ten teams have been in there, have been very white, but they're not as white as you would imagine. But they've got an interesting underdog story. Everyone's written them off. They've never really competed for a national title. I think it makes for a good story, and their quarterback is definitely a Trump supporter. I would back Ole Miss. It'd be cool for the Rebels, but at the same time, I want Lane Kiffin to succeed at LSU. I do. I'm a huge Lane Kiffin fan, and I think it'd be undermining Kiffin's move to LSU for them to win. But I have no support for Oregon or Miami, so I'd say Indiana. They just have the most white-seeming spirit. You could argue for Ole Miss. If they had a white quarterback, it would. Even though their quarterback they do have sounds like the whitest black guy ever. They interviewed him on those post-game interviews. And whenever they interview players after post-game, because they got the adrenaline pumping, they've just been getting tackled and smashing people for 3 hours. And so they're all hyped up. So they're not usually give very good interviews. And they're like, oh, yeah, we threw the ball. But he gave a very articulate interview. He's like, hello, what did you think about this? And he's like, well, we were wanting to get the ball down the field, and we got to play harder than the other team and this. And I was like, wow, this is the whitest sounding black guy on planet Earth. I was very surprised by that. But still, at the end of the day, probably Indiana. Ole Miss close second, but definitely not Miami or Oregon. That made my thoughts on that. So there's that. And now we're going to conclude with, hold on, we almost forgot about old New England refugee. He said, please discuss the Texas Senate primary again and how Wesley Hunt's interest has changed everything. It truly has changed everything because Trump world is more likely to back Wesley Hunt in this than Paxton. I think a lot of right wingers are going to be mad about that because it's once again just backing a random minority. The thing is, unlike with some other races, well, namely Florida, where Byron Donalds is not really suited to a statewide race, Hunt has less baggage from as far as I know, and then Paxton. Paxton has a lot of baggage. Paxton, I like Paxton, but Paxton would potentially lose a general election race. He's got a lot of corruption allegations, and I don't. That's not going to help him in a contentious Senate race. Cornyn is too much of the old guard. He's old. Trump doesn't like him, and there's that. Hunt, though, it might help Cornyn because it'll divide the anti-Cornyn vote. But Hunt is far more willing to get Trump's endorsement. Apparently, Trump world has turned on Paxton. For what reason, I don't know. But so they're more inclined to back Hunt. But they might just stay out of the race. This might be a gift to Cornyn. As it might help Cornyn stay alive in the Senate primary. But Hunt, I don't like backing these random minorities. He would be pro-Trump. He'd vote better than Cornyn. He could win a race. He does not have the baggage that Herschel Walker and Byron Donalds have. It's not ideal, but it is what it is. What matters is you get a candidate guy in there who's going to vote for the MAGA agenda and win a general election. That's probably Wesley Hunt. Cornyn, not MAGA. He's always been trying to find a way to get amnesty, and he's been anti-Trump many times. Now he's pretending to be MAGA because he doesn't want Trump to endorse one of his opponents. Paxton would be very MAGA. The problem is he's got a lot of baggage that would hurt him in a general election. So there's that. I mean, I'll discuss this further down the line. It does show a lot of stupidity that goes on in Texas politics, that this is the most viable candidate. But, a lot of this is the fault of GOP primary voters. All the time I get this take is like, the leadership, the establishment keeps imposing these token minorities on the base. It's like, actually, no, the base always keeps falling for these token minorities. They actually the establishment didn't want Vivek. Like, DeWine doesn't like him. They wanted, like, Tressel or the lieutenant governor to be running in that position, but Vivek had far more support, so they weren't the ones backing Vivek. DeSantis, I don't know who you'd call establishment in Florida, but the old establishment doesn't like Byron Donalds, probably for good reason. And the establishment didn't like Royce White in Minnesota, but guess who voted for him? The base. The base loves these token minorities. They are like, oh, it's finally a non-white saying what we want. They're the ones who are backing this. It's not like the establishment, like, rubbing their hands together. It's like, oh, we finally found, we're probably pulling a fast one on the base that hates these token minorities. No, it's our base who keeps picking these people. Unfortunately. I mean, there's some people that the establishment loves, like Tim Scott, Daniel Cameron in Kentucky, and other people like that, but the base loves them too. So it's not like the base is having this foisted upon them against their own wishes. It's usually the base's fault that these people are become serious candidates in the first place. It's the same with Byron Donalds, same with Herschel Walker, even though that was Trump back, but the base loved him at first. Royce White, Mark Robinson, even though Robinson was pretty base, but he was clearly not a candidate suited to run for governor or senate. But this is the fault of the base. They can't get enough of these token minorities. So that's my case for that. And now we will conclude with L.K. Rurik. L.K. Rurik, his question is, given the types of unsavory, by our standards, individuals and unstable minds attracted to anti-Israel right-wing politics, what is the Greer head guide to being properly anti-Semitic? I don't fucking know. Man, you should just not fall for every... First off, we're not anti-Semitic, as we're at the same time we disavow racism as well. So we are the least bigoted. We are opposed to bigotry in all its forms. So on the anti-Israel stuff, I think you just gotta not think of it as like the center of the world and it animates all issues. Is that I find people, it's like, I'm more Israel critical than what conservatives would have tolerated. I don't view that we need to have this undying worship of Israel. I think it's necessary to rein them in and to reevaluate our relationship with Israel. But at the same time, I don't think it's the most important issue in the world, and it's at the center of all issues. Is that with a lot of these people, they come to believe that everything that happens in the world involves an Israeli element. They're doing that with Venezuela, which Venezuela, it's not because they're backing Hamas, it's because they're a rogue agent that's anti-American. This is Maduro in our own backyard that pushes drugs, pushes migrants, and allows China into our backyard. That's the reason why. The symbolic support for Palestine is not why we got rid of Maduro. But they think every issue. Now we're seeing that with the Somalis. It's like, no. And that doesn't even make sense because the Somaliland thing, yes, Israel is wanting to recognize it and send Palestinians there. But if we all turn on Somalia and are wanting to send Somalis back to their homeland, this interferes with Israel's objectives. If this was fully on Israel, we'd be talking about how awesome Somalis are and wow, we should support Somaliland and we should absolutely not be sending Somalis back. Because if we're sending all the Somalis back, then they're not going to have any room for the Palestinians. So this doesn't make any sense. So they think every issue eventually comes back to Israel. And I think that's really what you need to, the mindset you need to oppose. I guess that would be my one thing about it. It's like, you can be, it's probably necessary to be, not have some skepticism towards Israel. At the same time, you shouldn't assess every single issue on this matter, which is what a lot of the people on the online sphere do, is that everything, there's a shooting, if you stub their toe, if the red light is going slow, if you can't get a job, you can't get a girlfriend, there's Somali fraud, every fucking issue comes back to Israel. I think that's not very productive and it's something to avoid. And so that would be my one takeaway from that, is that we should be skeptical of Israel, but we shouldn't imagine it as the most important issue in the world, and we shouldn't relate every single issue back to it, especially when they're unrelated. So that is my take on that. And so that is it for Highly Respected today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. We're going to have a different schedule this week. We are going to have 4 podcasts this week. Tomorrow, I was planning on for today's podcast to do the opening segment as a retrospective on J6 because the 5-year anniversary is tomorrow. But news got in the way, so I'm going to do a podcast tomorrow on it for the Substack. It will be paywalled. Sorry, we're gonna do it for the paywall podcast on tomorrow, and then on Wednesday we're gonna have the mailbag. Then Thursday an article, or we might have an article earlier depending on when I want to publish it. And then on Friday we will have an IQ supplement, likely on the history of U.S. Latin American relations. So that will be the schedule this week. So we're gonna have 4 podcasts. So tomorrow will be a J6 retrospective, and I will be able to give my takes on J6 that I was supposed to do today until we kidnap Maduro. So that is it for I Respected today. Be on the alert for all the great content coming up this weekend. So until next time, stay respected.